Moist.
All right, everybody, and welcome to episode 226 of the 9 Years podcast with myself, Nick Draper, and today, not with the face of the BBC Sport website, Mr. Stuart Deakins. It does mean that from now on, I will no longer be able to start the podcast by saying, joined as always by Stuart Deakins, because Stuart's unfortunately not with us this week. He has got very, very lucky, and he's got tickets to a West End musical. We know which one we are referring to. We don't have to say it. He's gone back to see it now for this is episode 226 of the podcast, and he's seen Priscilla, Queen of the Desert now 349 times. So, Stu, hope you have a good evening. Well done for being able to get into a theatre during these times of COVID. But in Stu's place, we have got, first of all, the star of Back to Plough Lane Live on the club's official, I did say official, but I meant to say official, social media channels. He is the man who hasn't had a haircut since 1999. George Jones, welcome to the 9 Years podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You should be thankful, quite frankly. This is a very magnanimous thing that I'm offering you here this week. We are also joined, making his long-awaited return to the podcast. I can't remember the last time he was on. Clearly it was memorable, even though I can't remember when it was. But he is my older brother, Mr. Chris Draper. Chris, how are you?
Hello, everyone. I can pinpoint exactly the last time I was on the podcast. It was just before we took the trip in the minibus to Bradford.
Literally just before? Were you just getting in the van?
We were sitting in it, I think, I was driving, so I probably didn't give too much attention. But it was the week before when we were all doom and gloom and just trying to get through the podcast, worried about the final game.
You have a good memory.
Well, I can remember that. What I did yesterday is neither here nor there.
Well, no, and we won't go into that one because that sounds dodgy as anything. But thank you, gents, for taking the time to be on the show this week. Much appreciated. Before we get into a review of the Accrington game, we will also be talking about the early League One table, and we'll be looking at the potential of supporters being allowed back into stadiums. But before we do all that, I'm going to go through all the usual gubbins, a shout-out and a call-out. And for the very first time this season, it was brought to my attention just prior to recording that people might not be sure exactly what the difference between a shout-out and a call-out is. And I've now explained this to both Chris and George, and Chris is now going to, in typical teaching fashion, Chris, this is like the plenary where I check your understanding at the end of the lesson. Can you explain to me what the difference between a shout-out and a call-out is?
Now, I wasn't aware there was going to be a test on this, so I'll do my best. So, as far as I'm aware, a call-out is to say that you're a bit crap, and a shout-out is to say hello to someone.
Yeah, I mean, I would accept it.
I'll accept. Oh, thank you, Teach.
George, would you want to... Chris has given us a solid answer there, but George, would you like to expand on it a little bit for the class? A Daniel Bryan answer.
I think Chris nailed it as far as my understanding was to go in.
That's what
okay,
he said.
A shout-out is not just a hello, it's a praise. Someone who deserves some praise. And that person I will come on to shortly. The call-out is going, again, to Arsenal Football Club this week for spending £48 million on a new signing, having announced, but they announced it a little while ago, but it came out this week that one of the 55 club employees that they made redundant to save money, despite the fact they just spent £48 million on a player, was a club employee who also volunteered to be the Gunnosaurus mascot, or to be the person inside the dinosaur suit. And that's not good PR, Arsenal, but they were saved somewhat. And a shout out to Mesut Ozil, who actually said that he would pay the wages of that said employee. However, Chris, you are well versed in the world of mascots. It's not great optics for Arsenal, is it?
Quite shocking timing, really. But then I suppose what we didn't know, what I didn't know was that he had a full-time role at the club and was involved in the redundancies that were already announced. I've been saying this throughout this pandemic-y period that we've had in football, the haves and the have-nots, the stark divide is even bigger than I think anybody gave it credit for, and it's actually going higher up the league, if that makes sense. So we're looking now, anyone in the Premier League or has just been relegated, and then everybody else. Highlighted in no more starker fashion by the fact that they've sacked 55 people, well, like you say, by spending out all that money on a player who I don't really know if he's any cop, to be fair.
I'd never heard of him before in my life. George, did you know of this player that Arsenal have signed? His name is Partey, I think.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I do know about him. He's a very good player.
That's not weird at all.
Arsenal will be improved.
We're pretty sure you would have heard of him, George, to be fair. But is any footballer worth £48 million, though, George? Let's be honest.
Well, yes. I know I'm not going to be popular, but yeah, the market rates at the moment mean they are. They shouldn't be, but they are.
This is the problem. The market rate is the problem.
Especially as the markets currently are suffering to the tune of 55 redundant people for the very same organisation that's just spent the money.
Yes, no, definitely. It's not right, but sadly the market rate says that's what you have to pay to get a player. And that's what Arsenal decided they had to pay.
It's interesting
not right,
point.
But that's the industry.
An interesting point that Chris raises there about the number of relegated clubs in the Championship. So clubs relegated from the Premier League that are now in the Championship. And I'm looking down the list of 24 Championship clubs. And I'm going to play a game of how many of these have never been in the Premier League since 1992, because we're going to say it on those terms, because that's when the Premier League exploded into this ridiculously expensive, rich conglomerate that it is. Let's play a game. So Wycombe, Preston, Brentford, Rotherham, Millwall, Luton, Bristol City. What's that, 7?
I've got 8.
Who's the other one? Who's I not mentioned?
Bristol City, Luton, QPR. QPR's
QPR.
Oh no, of course they've been. Sorry, they were in the Premier League, weren't they? I retract my previous statement. I do apologise.
It was before George was born, but yes, QPR have indeed been in the Premier League. That's quite a lot of teams that are ex-Premier League teams in that division, and you've got to say Luton Town punching above their weight really in 5th after 4 games. However, that's besides the point. The call out and the shout out, bizarrely, Mesut Ozil for actually stepping up and giving some of his vast, ridiculous, unbelievable, unsustainable wages to the said employee. So for 1 week, you can get some positive press for Mesut. I'm going to give more positive press now to some of our patrons who have subscribed for £5 a month to patreon.com/9YRF podcast for extra bonus podcast content and early access to other features. And thank you guys for taking your squad numbers as well. George, you can have your shout out this week. Thank you for your £5. You are number 89. I'm assuming after 1889.
Yes, that is correct.
Which is convenient for today and apt for today because 18 is your age and 89 is Chris's. Other shout-outs for patrons, Lee Rumbelow, thank you, Lee, number 62, and Malcolm Smith, number 65. Thank you, Lee and Malcolm, for all your support.
Bingo.
Much appreciated.
Bingo, I got bingo. What do I get for 4 corners?
I only said 3 numbers, so I'm going to call you a liar because that's impossible.
I just made one up.
You made your own bingo card up, which doesn't have...
Yeah, it's only got 3 corners. It's a triangle.
It's a triangle, right. Well... There's some more maths, more teaching from us today on the 9 Years podcast. Some year 1 maths. Might even be reception maths. Anyway, right. Accrington Stanley then. A bit of a back down to earth with a bang, as they say, or a bump, or whatever that phrase is. 2-1 defeat, having been 1-0 up. We threw it away inside 5 minutes towards the end of the first half. With a couple of, poorly defended. Again, it's poor defending. We talked about Fleetwood and how good our shape was and how well we defended as a team away at Fleetwood. But I did make the point on the podcast last week, a lot of our problems defensively do not come from team shape. They come from individual errors. And George, the first goal we conceded was horrendous. Why is no one taking charge of that situation at the back?
I think that's definitely, a problem. We spoke about it after the game on Saturday on Back to Plough Lane Live. We spoke about it again on Sunday night on our Discord show. There was a real lack of leadership in the back and in the way they were. Nobody took command of that situation in an area where a leader would. There wasn't an obvious leader in the penalty area at that time. Whereas if there was, somebody just shouts away and it gets cleared into next week and we can relax. But that didn't happen, and it's just that cost us, and that's the concerning thing, because having a leader is not something you can fix overnight. It's not something that a player can just do the next week. It's something that is more of a longer term fix that's going to be needed to happen. And after obviously the game earlier in the week as well, it looks like we're probably going to be playing these back three for a while longer together. So it's going to be really interesting to see which of those three, whether it's going to be Luke O'Neill, Paul Kalambai, or Terrell Thomas, which of those three is going to step up and be a leader to try and take command in those situations, to try and make sure we stop conceding goals from set pieces when we're not clearing our lines.
Chris, why is the goalkeeper not in that conversation? Why is he not the one that should be the one organising and defending and making shouts of that nature?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, not being there and not hearing a lot of what goes on during the game, I couldn't comment. However, Connell's had a bit of a mixed introduction to life as a Dom. He was, I think, I may be being a bit overly harsh, but for a couple of the Plymouth goals, for example, he was a bit suspect expositioning. It did look as though there were too many players almost crowding him when we were defending the set pieces. He needs to be able to see. I think maybe that was the issue with some of those.
He's also he's a little bit on the shorter side as well, isn't he? Which doesn't help.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, that was the reason. Sorry to jump in, Chris. I think it's one of the reasons there was so many bodies around him. It's because we saw it in the games earlier this season. He is getting caught in no man's land coming from crosses because he doesn't have the physical presence to come out and claim crosses outside his own 6-yard box. So I think that is one of the reasons we had so many bodies in our own penalty area. And I have to say, Chris, I think you're being very harsh blaming him for the goals against Plymouth. I think they're all well placed, and I think it'd be harsh to blame him for any of them.
I don't mean obviously the two spectacular ones. There was absolutely nothing to do about them, but the other two, okay, yeah. If you sound being a bit harsh, I think a bit harsh will sue me. I think he could have done better.
I mean, we talk about set pieces. It's a common recurring theme, and football fans up and down the country will all be talking about. It always makes me laugh because, on the one hand, we're always expected to score goals from set pieces, and we always bemoan the fact that we never do. And people say, "Well, we should be better. We should be scoring more goals from set pieces and corners and free kicks and stuff." And then on the flip side, we're always like, "Well, we should never concede goals from set pieces." I mean, which one is it? You can't have both. And no, we can't win on this. The problem is, from memory, you're talking about goals at Plymouth. Do we not have the very simple third goal that Plymouth got was a similar situation? Was it not, George? I know you said you not to blame Truman on that count, but the near post header again, should he not come for a ball like that? Should he not be more dominating in his 6-yard box, or dominant?
Dominant, yes, better.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, yeah, but again, I think that's a goalkeeper knowing what his ability is and knowing what his strengths and weaknesses are. Because as a goalkeeper, there's no point him coming for a ball unless he's 100% certain he's going to be able to deal with that. Because if he doesn't deal with that situation properly, we're going to concede. So to him, it's better in that situation to trust his defenders to try and deal with it. And I think, again, lacking a leader, lacking someone on the field to try and organise set pieces is what is hurting us in those situations. And it's something that we're going to have to see a player grow into, whether that's Luke O'Neill growing and becoming more vocal as the most experienced of the three, or Terrell Thomas, who's perhaps the more natural leader of the three, stepping up into more of a captain's role. Because with the captain being at the far end of the pitch and Joe Piggott, who's, he might be back defending set pieces, but he's not a defender, we really need the defenders to start taking responsibility in those situations.
You mentioned earlier that we're going to probably look to stick with those 3 centre halves for the foreseeable future. There was, and we're clearly not moving away from the 3-5-2 setup, but there was, and you mentioned Terrell Thomas there was a change of shape, wasn't there, to try and get back into the game when Ethan Chislett did come on for Terrell, but it seems to be more inspired by Terrell picking up a knock. But when the substitution happened, what did we do with the shape of the team? Because I'm so confused looking at this lineup. It going from a 3-5-2 to what? A 4-3-3?
It was a 4-4-2 diamond we switched to. Ethan Chislett was already coming on before Terrell went down for the second time getting treatment, and before we knew Terrell had to come off. So I think Chislett was definitely coming on. I think we just changed who was going to come off to allow him to come on to make sure we got Terrell off. But like I said, it went to a 4-4-2 diamond narrow. So you had Woodyard and Riley as the sort of wider midfielders with Chislett as the more attacking option in that diamond.
And then Anthony Hartigan, who'd come on at that point at the base of it.
Yeah.
Chris, what are your thoughts on Hartigan? Not so much Hartigan, more the fact that he was the one that was chosen to come on for Oxanen in the first place. Do you not think we had this conversation about the midfield three and how they can be more attacking in shape when you've got Chislett more advanced of Woodyard and Riley, and then how it can be more defensive when you have Oxanen and Hartigan behind the two of those. When you're 2-1 down at home, do you want a like for like in that situation? Can you see the logic of that one?
Honestly, no. I think Hartigan is the player that you bring on to shore up a midfield rather than the one who, when you're chasing a game. That seems it's pretty much putting into a shorter soundbite exactly what you just said, don't get me wrong. But I don't see him as someone who gets the pulses racing when he comes on, which is not his failing. He's a what's the best way to describe him? He's just someone you put in there to almost tighten it up rather than to expand the play and go forward.
Yeah, he's someone you bring on to control the tempo, to dictate the style of play, to try and bring the game under control if it's opening up and becoming a bit too free-flowing. He's not a player you bring on...
Yeah. Oh, go on. Sorry, I think you were about to say what I was about to say.
Yeah, he's not a player you bring on to bring that creative spark to create something out of nothing. And when Ethan Chislett came on...
It's not his fault. It's not. It's
not.
The player he is.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just whether he's the right option.
Yeah, and I mean, Ethan Chislett very nearly got a goal within 20 seconds of coming on again. So that nearly paid off when Chislett did eventually come on. But Hartigan, it's not his fault. Nothing against him. He's an incredibly gifted player, but he's not the player who's going to be that creative spark. He's more that deep lying playmaker who can control a game, dictate the tempo, slow things down when we need to.
Yeah,
I think the type of player he is.
Yeah, I think him going on at that stage was an error for that match. I think that was the wrong decision. I'm just going to call that out.
I am also wondering, we're talking about that spark to get you back into the game, and I'm looking at the bench, and really, Ollie Palmer, again, you wouldn't say he's that sort of player. I think when we talk about sparks to come on and liven things up, you're thinking of someone like Chislett. Back in the day, we'd be thinking of players like Michael Hughes or Jason Ewell or someone like that.
I think, sorry, Nick, but just the Ollie Palmer situation would have massively given us a huge option against Accrington. Because when they did go sort of take the lead, they just sat back and were so defensive. It would have been, having Ollie Palmer would have given us an option because it meant we didn't have to play through them. As it was, because of the players we had on the pitch and the style of play, we were having to play. We were still having to try and pass our way through when they were having 10 men behind the ball. Whereas if we had Ollie Palmer, it gives us that option of just putting it in the mixer, playing for second balls, trying to get a flick on, trying to create something. It just gives us another way of getting into that penalty box rather than having to pass it through a team which is very well drilled defensively.
Yeah, they played a perfect game. Accrington. They took advantage of the fact that we switched off twice and then sat on it. It's exactly what we did against Fleetwood to a degree.
Yeah, definitely.
There's nothing wrong with what they did. It's just that it's frustrating then that the choice was made, and I think that even when we did make the substitute, it was about 10 minutes too late. If it had been on for that extra 10 minutes, would we have turned it? Would we have at least got another one? Probably, yeah. But the way we went about it was almost like we thought we were winning at that point. That's the sort of substitution I thought that was. That was when you're in a winning position substitution, not when you're in a losing position.
And we haven't really spoken about the winning goal from Matt Butcher, who I believe was once on EastEnders. But, I mean, it's a good turn and it's a good strike. I wonder if we can criticise, maybe, again, similar to the Plymouth goal, the spectacular goal, their second, when we could perhaps suggest that on midfield didn't get tight enough to him or get in his face enough. But that's a point of conjecture. You can always argue that players don't want to get too tight in certain situations, especially if they're on a booking or if they're right on the edge of the box and they don't want to give away a foul. I get that. I understand that. Just to go back quickly, though, to the scorer of Accrington's equaliser, Ross Sykes. And George, this is a player we've come up against a number of times. He's a decent player, isn't he? He's a decent centre-half, and we really struggled against him. Yeah,
I like him a lot. He was playing the same role that Paul Kalambai was playing for us, of basically being the big, physical, overlapping centre-back. He had a couple of really good runs coming out of the back. And he was a good leader on the day. He was good on the ball. But for me, he was man of the match by a considerable distance. And I would have liked to have played like that in our team, because I think maybe we don't concede those goals if he was playing for us. Yes, and as Chris will tell you all, size, it doesn't really matter, but Sykes is very tall, and he's still only 21, and I wouldn't be surprised. He was at Burnley before. I wouldn't be surprised if he moved up to a higher level. I think he's definitely got the potential to do that. Looking at the game as a whole then, to sort of wrap it up before we get on to 3-word reports, we've got 2 of you this week to ask, so I will start with Chris. Who had for you the best week on the pitch for us?
Best week on the pitch, even though he came on very, very late, was Chislett, because he instantly upped the tempo.
George?
I'm going to have to say Chislett as well, I think. He was very impressive when he came off the bench. He was our most creative player on the day, and it's a very difficult one, but I am going to say Ethan Chislett.
I'm going to rewind a little bit as well, because this isn't probably really fair. I know we've lost and we've concentrated, as you always do when you lose, on the sort of negatives, but we did score a goal. Longman was alert to tap in after the Piggott had a good shot come back off the post. Longman very energetic as always. Scuffed a chance when McLaughlin hit the post in the second half, but we should focus on the positives that did come out of it, which is we are still scoring goals, and Longman and Piggott are looking very lively. As you say, though, it would be interesting if Chislett had got 90 minutes with those two up top. Well, hey, it is what it is. Chris, who had the worst week?
What a good question. Can I say the defensive line for not switching on at those 2 goals?
Yes,
can I call it a group of people rather than singling someone in?
Yes, you can. That's absolutely fine. George, would you single someone in? Fair enough.
It's going to be tricky, but I'm going to say Callum Riley.
Go on, explain.
I think if you look at it, I think one of the reasons that we played so well, it was evident against Fleetwood, it was evident against Plymouth as well, and in the earlier games against Northampton and Plymouth. Our midfield was so energetic. It was the high press, and it relieved pressure on the defence. We were able to control the game when we were in possession, and their high energy was allowing us to sort of press from the back, have a higher line, and have to worry about less defensive work. And the midfield won us the game at Fleetwood. And yet Callum Riley, Yako, and Alex Woodyard didn't have a great performance against Accrington. But for me, Callum Riley's a Mr. Consistent. He's the one who every game I've seen from him this year has been 7 out of 10. It's just Accrington. He was anonymous and he went missing, basically. And for a midfielder, that was more disappointing compared to how he played in the first few games of the season.
I was going to talk about the worst week being for I Follow. Now, George, you're going to have had these issues because you were at Loftus Road, or the Kian Prince Foundation Stadium, as it is now to be referred to. But yeah, I mean, our 3-word report was never again I Follow because, for a litany of reasons. Chiefly, number one, don't give me a discount voucher code and then charge me £10 anyway. But secondly, where did the footage go? Start the second half. It just disappeared. We didn't see it at home. If you're watching at home, you didn't see the first 5-10 minutes of the second half because it just coverage just dropped out completely. And this is not the fault of anyone from ourselves or from Accrington Stanley. The horrendous crackling on the audio. Don't know why that was. Very, very frustrating. George, you were there, so you wouldn't have had to put up with these irritations. But it was very irritating, and we weren't alone in that. So I'm not sure I'm going to be watching a game on I Follow ever again. George, what is it like being at the stadium? Is it weird? No fans? strange, like a training game?
Yeah, the away games are very much like a training game. Feels very much like an under-23. You can tell the tempo's not what it would be if there was a crowd. As someone who's attended a lot of under-23 games and behind closed and sort of reserve games before, all of those things, it's not unusual for me. But the home games at Loftus Road, where they're pumping in the artificial crowd noise into the stadium itself,
it's weird.
That is so surreal, and it doesn't aid my enjoyment of the game inside the stadium. And when I watched a previous game on iFollow, it didn't enhance it there. And I'm not sure how much it actually helps the players at all. It just makes it even a weird experience, even weirder.
Chris, you're not a fan, like myself, of the fake crowd noise that is being pumped into stadiums.
I've seen a few games on the telly and just thought it just feels odd because it's obviously manufactured. I know it seems silly because obviously it's manufactured, but it's just so obvious as to be distracting. Especially if you then get a decision, you miss it and there's a delay between the ball hitting the net, and as happens. And I've obviously, I don't know if the listeners are aware, but I follow NFL as well, and they've had that problem and they've tried to pump noises in. What's even weirder for them is that there are a couple of indoor arenas where they actually flash the lights on and off as well, and then when there's nobody in there, there's no point to it. They started actually putting. So I think there was a game on Tuesday night where they had 16% capacity. I don't know where they pulled that number from. And you were shown to your area, and you couldn't move from your area, which is even harder when it's 3 hours worth of stuff to watch than an hour and a half. But it's worth bearing that in mind for when we look to bringing people back into stadiums here, using that as an example. Because without it, and with all that tannoid-in nonsense, it just sounds rubbish.
Isn't Tannoy a brand name? Is it not a public address system?
Yeah, all right, Partridge. That's one for the Alan Partridge fans there.
Yes, of which we have many. I was actually thinking about this earlier. Sorry, listeners, you got me on a tangent here. I was just thinking, not an hour ago, for some reason, the episode with Alan Partridge where he gets into argument with the farmers, and as he's sailing down the canal, one of the farmers yells at him, "Partridge, you rude word." I don't think the delivery of that line is the best delivery of any line, I think, in any sitcom ever. It's perfect. It's so good.
That is a tangent.
That is, but I was thinking about it earlier for some reason. I don't know why. Sometimes I just think of Steve Coogan on a boat. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And on that bombshell.
On that bombshell, let's have some 3-word reports on Twitter. Thank you for all your responses. Again, lots and lots and lots. I won't be able to read them all, but let's pick out some ones that we were talking about. The destination developer at RogHobC said Accrington pressed well, so some praise there for our visitors for how they went about the game, like we were saying. The Jumble at the Jumble08 says too late Glyn, which I assume is a reference to the substitutions, again, that we have been saying. There's loads. There's so many good ones. Let's go for Anak T at Anak T. Crackly microphone rage, as I was saying about iFollow. Very, very irritating. Gary Wilkes at Gary_M_Wilkes. Y Bench Chislett. Dan Curran at Curran Dan also says better with Chislett. And Callum McGarry at McGeary. I don't know. At MCGUIRI. Pronounce that how you will, listeners.
Sounds like a bot.
It reminds me of a bank for some reason. I don't know why. He says, snapped, crackled and flopped.
Ew.
Very good. Very good. And Ray Armfield, making his return to the 3-word reports after a week's absence. That's not even an absence. It was on last week. It's just been 7 days since we last did a podcast. Another fine mess with a reference to... I was going to say Laurel and Hardy, but that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It is.
I mean, he is, obviously.
Stan Laurel, Stan Lee. I think that's what I was going for there. Yeah, that makes sense now. I'm not old enough to remember Laurel and Hardy. Chris, what are they like?
Never met him.
Anyway, thank you for those. Moving on, let's have a quick look at the league on table. Oh dear, listeners, this is what happens when you cobble together a podcast at short notice and also do it on, clearly, as you might have noticed, some audio connections that are slightly out of sync with each other. but we're making it work. It's all fine. George, early League One table, Lincoln City and Hull City have a 100% records and sit top of the table. Here's a question for the pair of you, and I'll start with George because I mentioned you there, George. I think in the Premier League, with no fans in stadiums, the effect is being felt more keenly, and we're getting some crazier games and some crazier scorelines. But in the lower leagues, where crowds aren't particularly as big, and sometimes you can go to games where there isn't really much of an atmosphere, I think I don't see any real change in results. Plymouth, we could argue the Plymouth game was a one-off, and maybe if there'd been fans in stadiums, we wouldn't have thrown that away. But that's conjecture. You can argue both sides. In general, what I'm looking at so far seems pretty much in keeping with what you kind of expect of this division.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think if you'd have said at the start of the season, draw up a league table 4 games in, there's not really many surprises. You'd expect, I didn't have Lincoln to be sort of in the automatics. I had them on the edge of the playoffs. But other than that, it's pretty much what you would expect for this time of the season. And the results, like you said, there haven't been any crazy results in League One this season. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why that's been different to the Premier League. But it definitely seems that, from the table and results-wise, like a normal League One season.
I have a theory, Chris, about why, as George says, the crazy results in the Premier League and the number of goals being scored. I think it's concentration.
I think it's just the bizarre nature. I mean, everything just feels or has the feeling of a pre-season friendly. I mean, it's not just purely because can't just purely be because people aren't in the ground, but also because it's the whole setup. It's just like almost like a casual little clap every time you score a goal. The fans are everything. You've made this point on the podcast, I'm sure, many times before, and also on the Twitter feed. Fans make football. Without the fans, this all just feels very sanitized, very clean, very
hollow,
boring. It's just dull. Watching the games is just so desperately dull because there's no great, it's just they're going through the motions almost, the players, in my opinion. I'm sure they go turn around and say, no, we're putting in maximum effort and everything is 100% and all this sort of stuff. They'll probably go with the 110%, but of course you can't do that. But without the fans behind them, pushing them on, they're just going through the motions. I mean, the 2 results of the weekend, obviously the 6-1 and the 7-2, stand out a mile. When would that happen with the scorelines being that way if the fans had been in there? I would argue that it wouldn't.
No, I don't think it would have happened at all. I mean, I also wonder if there's an element of, in an attacking sense, I think complacency or a lack of concentration defensively, players can switch off maybe because they're not feeling the pressure put under them by fans, which helps intensify that pressure and sort of gives you a shot of adrenaline to keep you concentrating and working at a high level. Similarly, on the other flip side, less pressure on the forward players. If you get into a position to score, maybe when in front of a packed stadium, you might doubt yourself because of the watching eyes right on top of you. As you say, because it's got that more pre-season friendly or even training ground feel, they're more concentrated on their technique and what they need to do. And it takes that sting out of having to, or fear out of what would happen if you miss. And it has been mad, but in League One, as we say, it seems to be pretty standard. And I mean, it will take another 6 or so games to really settle down. There's lots of clubs that have won 2 and lost 2, or have drawn 2 and lost 1 other side, like ourselves, and ensconced in mid-table. Oh, look, George, look who's bottom of the league. Oh dear, what a shame. Never.
In our 23 league team league. What?
What? Huh? What?
There's only 23 teams in it. So
what are you on about? No. What are you talking about?
Never mind.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Sorry. I was thinking you were getting confused with Berry last year. I was thinking, no, we've got 24 this year. It's not 23 this year. Yes, I see.
Know full well what I meant.
I see what you're saying. Yes, good point. We won't mention them ever again in history, although we are playing them on Halloween. And
how apt is that?
Yeah,
somebody in the fixture room was taking the piss there, I would suggest.
And also considering who our following game is.
Exactly.
Oh,
I couldn't tell you. I don't know that far ahead. I'm going to be honest with you, listeners.
The following game will be our first game at Plough Lane, but they surely could not have known that. prior to.
That would be Nostradamus style.
The fixture, the state we were meant to be having the keys for the new Plough Lane, which was the 25th of October, hasn't changed for a few months. So when the fixtures came out, it was still meant to be the 25th of October. So they might have known. I'm giving the EFL way too much credit here.
Don't give them any credit. No, it's way too much. They suck. Right, we are running late, but sounding all right.
Sounding like we're on different types of input here. Yeah.
It might not be the smoothest audio you've ever had on this podcast, but hey. Very quickly, Chris, I want you to just explain to the listeners. We won't delve into this because we don't have the time now, but fans in stadiums, there is a petition to get fans into stadiums back again because people are arguing they're allowed in many other venues, including cinemas, which is fine. However, and we're all in favour, I want fans in stadiums. I would have full stadiums right now this very minute if it was up to me. I think we need to get on with life and get moving again. But, Chris, there is a good reason, logically, why football fans and football fans in stadiums is being treated differently to things such as cinemas or, in Stu's case, theatres for musicals.
Well, yeah, it's quantity, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest. It's quantity and mixing. The problem we've got, and I'm on the side of you, I think that it should just all be opened up and relaxed, but we are now living with these rules and we have to abide by them because you get in trouble and told off. But if you're going to have a rule of 6, you can't then have a rule of 1,000 to go into a football match. It's quite as simple as that. And the petition's great, and I back the petition. I think it's a wonderful thing to do, but they are just going to put the kibosh on it. He's come out yesterday, or was it the day before, and said, well, I think we'll be free of all this by October 2021. He thought everything was going to be turning around in September. Nobody knows what's going on. We're listening to evidence that is not based in scientific fact, but that's another conversation entirely. They won't allow fans back in any great quantities this side of the new year. No,
I agree. And unfortunately, as you say, it's quantity. And George, we'll come to you in a second, but it is quantity.
We know what George thinks.
It is quantity, and it's also the quantity not inside the stadium itself, but travelling up and down the country when you've got multiple 3 o'clock kickoffs and things like that in the lower leagues. It's a lot of people moving around the country and mixing. And that is, unfortunately, as much as I don't like it, is the issue. Unless, George, you're going to throw some different light on this.
I think it's important to realise that this wouldn't be away fans. I think people are realistic about the fact we're not going to be allowed to go to away games for a considerable period of time. But this is more about very small numbers of home fans. My understanding is what's being pushed by the EFL, by the RFU, and by the Premier.
The what?
The RFU.
What the hell is that?
Egg chasing.
The rugby. Yeah, the rugby governing body.
Can we not on this podcast, please? Wrestling's fine, but no rugby, really.
Okay, so from all of the major sporting governing bodies, is they want to go back to the stage where we were meant to be right now in early October, where we were meant to have sort of test events technically of 1,000. And I think that's the starting place, and I think that's what they're hopeful we will have before Christmas, is having 1,000 people at games. After that, I think it'll be a very slow ramp up, but away games will not be feasible because of reasons Chris said about the transportation system.
So my counterpoint to that, George, would be, and one that is for broader debate, I know we're running out of time. So how do you decide who the 1,000 are? Is it geography? Because not talking about our circumstance so much, because we have a limited fan base. God bless us, we're doing well. But so if you're talking about getting 10% into Old Trafford, which is 7,500, who do you decide goes in there?
That's down to the individual clubs to decide.
Yes, but what you've got is, have you got 7,500 people that can all get to you within a 3-mile radius? Probably not with Man United, but that's another conversation. But do you only get 7,500 people coming locally, which would mean the local travel network would be stuffed with people? Do you get a portion from the local community, a portion from the next borough along? I mean, how do you even begin to get a system in place that means that you won't have a mass mix of people?
Well, I think you have a very low number of people anyway, because like I said, it's 1,000 people. So in most major cities, that isn't a huge strain on the public transport system, especially ones that are used to having to deal with significantly more than that on a normal match day.
You've not seen Heathrow train station, have you yet?
Not on a match day, it'll be. It's one of those things that it's going to be difficult to deal with, but the public transport system will be able to deal with it, especially when you consider that all clubs, it will be season ticket holders only, and for most clubs, probably long-term season ticket holders only.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I know where you're coming from.
Local.
Yeah, but
I think also I think there will be a massive drive to try and make it, to try and force people to not come on public transport and to try and force people to drive, which will obviously disadvantage us in our new ground. But for a lot of teams, it's feasible that if you're having 1,000 people there, you could get them all there in cars.
Drive and dress up in full bubble uniforms and hazmat suits. And
Is it a hazmat suit or a hazchem suit? I never know.
It's hazmat. Well, we call them hazmats, but personal choice.
Yeah. Do you know who does have hazmats? Oh, I've messed up the joke. Damn it. I'm not even going to go there now because I failed it so badly. Yeah, it doesn't even work if I do it now anyway, thinking about it. Anyway, George, I take your point fully. I'm going to ask you both a quick question, which I want a very quick answer to, which is, do we really want to experience football in stadiums with only 1,000 people in there? Chris, yes or no?
No.
George?
Yes, if it's that or nothing.
No, you said yes or no. I would have expanded. Don't you come in here with your full-on explanations.
Okay,
I've seen what it's like in America, and it's rubbish. So no.
So George, one word.
Yes.
Fair enough. I am still of the opinion, with Plough Lane, as frustrating as it is, that I would rather financially, I know there's many reasons why it can't happen. I'm not living in cloud cuckoo land. It would have been lovely to have been able to hold fire until everyone could get in, but obviously that is not possible. But anyway, we need to wrap up. So Swindon Town next week. Very well run through this. And again, George and Chris for a score prediction at the end of this. Last one at Peterborough United. They have played 4, won 2 and lost 2, which have been split home and away. So at home they won 2 and away they've lost 2 out of 2. They have some goals in their team. They have Jack Payne, they have Joel Grant, they have Brett Pittman, they have Matt Smith from Arsenal on loan who has scored goals already. Richie Wellens is the man in charge. Good manager, not been there very long, but got them promoted last season, kind of, with points per game. George, a score prediction for Swindon Town at the county ground.
I think it'll be an improved performance, but I think we'll lose 2-1.
Chris?
1-1, risky 1-1, I think.
Yeah, I'll go for a draw as well, because I like going for draws, and Swindon haven't had one yet, so I don't think they'll keep winning at home, but whether we'll get all 3 points, I don't know. We shall see. Updates from that game will be on Twitter at 9Wirers Podcast for you to follow there. Right, welcome, gents, to your first go at Whose 9 Is It Anyway?
Oh, I see what you did there. I like it.
George, you are going to struggle because I'm going back to the late 90s to start with, but you might be good on the third one. But let's see how we go. So this week, gents, I've picked the number 9 just because it felt like a good number to pick. And on that note, Chris, who wore the number 9 in the 1998-99 season?
Bugger.
No, it wasn't him. I think he played for Swindon.
Oh, I'm showing up the total lack of knowledge. Mine's got that. All I could think of was John Hartson, but that was the following year. Oh, no, it was that year. It's Hartson.
I was going to say Hartson.
So you're both going for Hartson. What about 1999-2000?
Well, that was Hartson. Am I failing miserably? Yeah. Well, this is...
I'll reveal all at the end, but it's...
I'll be honest, the only Wimbledon FC number 9 I know from that era in my head is Hartson, so I'm going to stick with that.
So you're saying John Hartson for both years?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. What about then 2012-2013? And here's a caveat for this one. 2 players wore number 9 that year. Can you name them both? George has got the look deep in thought, like he's on Question of Sport, thinking through his answers. And Chris, I can't see, so I don't know what he's doing.
He's thinking hard.
Well, it's obviously a loanee and a permanent, so I'm going to say 12-13. I'm going to say Michael Smith and Byron Harrison, but I think one of them's wrong.
Okay. Chris, want to volunteer a suggestion?
Byron Harrison's one.
Okay.
It's trying to remember who the other one is because it was a loan player.
Yeah, that's why I ended up on Smith. I couldn't remember who was on loan the first half of that season. I don't think it was Smith.
We had so many. Gary Alexander. Better guess.
George?
So I'm going to bottle it and say Charles Adamino. But I don't think he wore 9.
Okay. Thank you, gents. Let's go through these then.
Can I change my 98-99 one?
Go on.
Or just Ikoku.
Efan Ikoku? As opposed to the other Ikoku we had. Right, 1998-99 was in fact, Chris, Efan Ikoku. Very well done.
He went the year after, didn't he? That's why we got Hartson in. Anyway, moving on.
Yes, he jumped to Grasshopper Zurich, and then the following season, in 1999-2000, you are both correct, it was John Hartson for that season when we got relegated from the Premier League. 2012-13, Byron Harrison started the season as our number 9. So well done to the pair of you for that one. There were some interesting names volunteered. Gary Alexander, unfortunately, no. I think he was number 20-something that year. George, you went 1 year too early with Michael Smith. He joined the following season. Yeah. And you went 1 year too late for Charles Adamino, who I think might have been number 9 the previous season when he first joined. The other incumbent of the number 9 was a loan player. And let's just say, at this moment in time, he is no longer very popular with fans of AFC Wimbledon for where he has ended up later in his career.
Crawley.
Not Crawley.
I'm joking.
He might have done, I don't know. They play for so many clubs these days, I don't know. He might have, probably did play for Crawley at some point. No, even worse. Couldn't be any worse.
Milton Keynes.
Milton Keynes. Do you know which player I'm referencing?
I've got a bloody clue.
George?
Must have been a memorable one.
Yeah, clearly.
He was a decent player for us. I liked him as a player for us. He was Brennan Dickinson.
Oh.
Yeah.
And he came on loan from somewhere else. Brighton,
can I just say,
he
did come on loan from Brighton, but he was a left winger who is now playing at left back, and how that shouldn't be allowed because there is no way he should be wearing a number 9 shirt.
Well, he did for a spell with us, and memorably helped us escape relegation before he went on to be a... And I won't say any more than that.
Person we have met.
Yes. Right, gents, that brings us to the end of this week's show. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Reminder about our Patreon, patreon.com/9YRS podcast. And you can listen to the Discord show on Sunday with a review of the Swindon game. George will be in attendance at the County Ground to do some live work for Back to Power Live on the club's official social media, and Twitter updates will be on @9YRS podcast. But for all that is left to say is, George, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Listeners, I apologise for how high my voice went at times during this week's show. I did not know I was capable of going that high. I guess this is what comes when you teach girls. I suppose your pitch naturally goes up so you can be heard. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's it. We're going to say goodbye now. So, how do I sign off the podcast, guys? Bag first, milk last. Alexa Bliss. 2 + 2 = 4.
And moist.
Did you just say moist?
I just said moist.
Is that in reference to the tea or the Alexa Bliss?
Whichever one you want.
Really? Wow. I think my voice even got even higher there.
Really?
Yes. This is the weirdest sign-off we've ever had. But thanks for joining us. We will speak to you again next Friday.